Hey everybody, Coach Toolshed here, and in today's video I'm going to be bringing you my review for Outriders. And as with all reviews here on Coach Toolshed Gaming, you can rest assured that I have taken the time to fully beat the game before posting my review. In the case of Outriders, that means that I have gotten the Platinum Trophy for the game on PlayStation, and I've also taken the time to take all 4 character classes through the campaign and into the endgame, and I've taken one of my characters all the way to tier 15 in the endgame expeditions. For those of you who don't know what that means, I will be discussing that in depth in the review. My other characters are all at various stages of progression through the endgame, and all in all, I've spent over 180 hours in the game overall since it came out over a month ago. So let's just jump right into the review. And the first thing I want to say is I'm going to be doing this review slightly backwards from where I would normally do it. I'm going to be covering the end game first, and we'll be discussing the campaign a little bit later on, because I feel like the end game expeditions are where the bulk of the gameplay is going to end up being for the most players. I feel like that's where there's the most to talk about, and I feel like that's where the most pros and cons might lie when we're discussing the game, and I feel like that is where we should start. So that's what's going to happen. So once you go through the entire game, and the length of time it takes you to get through the campaign is going to vary greatly depending on if you just want to blast through to the end game quickly as possible, or if you want to take your time and go through the entire campaign and all the side quests and try to get all the collectibles and whatnot. If you just are someone who cares about loot, and you just want to get to the end game as quickly as possible, you can blast through the campaign in just a matter of several hours, probably about 6 or 7 hours. You could probably get through the campaign. If you keep the world tier turned to the lowest difficulty, you can probably do that very quickly. And then you can be in the end game if that's your goal. Now, the problems with the end game are numerous and extensive, and a lot of it boils down to not the gameplay or the presentation or anything like that. It really boils down to some really awful design decisions that have been made by the developers, and there's really no other way to put it. These choices that they've made and the way they've set up the entire endgame is so unbelievably stupid that I can't even imagine that the game launched in this state. I don't know what they were thinking of when they were planning this out, but it has led already to numerous issues. The player base has not really been too happy with the changes that have been getting made in the patches, and all of it revolves around endgame content. So what are some of the issues? Well, once you get through to the endgame, what you'll discover is that all you have to do is about a dozen or so expeditions. There's 14 total. Some of them will be unlocked for you right off the gate, but a couple will be held back until you progress further through the tiers of expeditions. There's 15 tiers in total. You will start at tier 1, and you will try to work your way all the way up to tier 15, where you'll be getting the highest level loot drops, and allegedly the highest chance of getting some of the highest top level gear. Unfortunately, because of the way the game is designed, other than these expeditions, there is literally nothing else to do in the end game besides this. If you want to progress your character, you can go back into the campaign, and even if you have the world tier bumped up to the highest difficulty, you will be getting loot drops that are far below what you could be getting in expeditions, and so it's really pointless to do anything in the end game besides these dozen or so expeditions. The problem is, all of these only take about 10 minutes to do. Some of them take a little bit less, some of them take a little bit longer, but on the whole, none of them really take much more than 12 to 14 minutes, and a couple of them, you can see clear times down around 5 or 6 minutes for a couple of them. So overall, based on this limited amount, you only have about 2.5 to 3 hours of gameplay that the developers expect everyone to keep running on a loop again and again and again, trying to get a gold level loot drop. Now, what does that entail? Well, unfortunately, the developers, in a short-sighted and baffling design decision, in a game that they touted as having a lot of build diversity, and indeed, if you go through the game and look at all the different mods you can put on your weapons, there is actually a shocking amount of different mods that you can put on all the stuff. They did a very good job compared to its competition, especially a game like Destiny 2 or other games of that ilk, where your options for your build are very limited. This game actually does a very good job of giving you a lot of options. Unfortunately, What the developers have decided to do with the endgame is to make all of your loot drops based not just on completing these expeditions, but they are timed. So your rewards are based solely on how quickly you are progressing through the game. What does this do? Well, the first problem that it causes is if you're a player who's in a group and you're not doing enough damage, players that are not, if you're in a random group, let's say, players will kick you out instantly if you're a player that isn't doing enough damage. So if you have a build that's based on a tank build, if you're one of the classes like the Devastator that's built around tanking damage and not necessarily dealing damage, which seems like it's something you should need for an end game that's called an expedition, but you really don't need a tank. The problem is it's all about DPS. It's all about time to kill when it comes to dealing damage to the enemies. Whoever's dealing the most damage, they're going to be the quickest ones to clear through these end game challenges, and that's how you get the gold. So that means anyone who's running a healer class or a tank class, they're essentially 100% useless in the end game. And if you actually play through the campaign and you move it up to the highest difficulties, if you end the campaign on tier 15, world tier 15, in the campaign, you will see that same result as well. When I was deciding which character to play right off the bat, I decided to go with the healer class, the Technomancer, because generally when I play in a group with some of my friends, I have a friend in particular who likes to rush into combat and tends to get himself killed quite frequently. So I like to play a class with a little bit of extra healing and some revives available. So I chose the Technomancer class because you can spec that out to be a bit of a really solid tank with a lot of crowd control options if you use an ice build. And I thought that that was going to be a great endgame build. Turns out, as soon as I got to the endgame and saw what the expeditions were all about, I realized that my build was 100% useless. So the 50 hours I spent gathering loot, gathering gear, leveling my gear up, thinking I had a pretty good build going into the endgame, thinking that a healer class, who would have thought a healer class would be important in an endgame? I mean, just like every single other class-based game that's ever existed, but in this game, it doesn't matter at all. You don't need a healer. What you need is to deal DPS, whether that be through dealing weapon damage or dealing through the what is called anomaly damage. It's basically the magic attacks that the different characters have, and some of the weapons also have these anomaly attacks attached to them. But they've pretty much made it completely impossible to run an off-meta build. What is the problem with that, you might say? Everyone just convert to a meta build. Well, what the developers have shown throughout the first month of the game is when too many people are running the meta build, what they're going to do is just swing the nerf hammer. They have not brought the other skill trees or the other weapon mods or armor mods up to what they consider to be the OP level of the things that they're nerfing. And so as a result, every time they put out one of these patches, these balance notes, people are just getting very upset, including myself. I have not been pleased with what they've done so far because I started out with one build, spent all that time, realized that the expeditions are so poorly designed that I had to throw my build entirely out the window for no other reason other than the timed aspect of these challenges. And then I converted to another build, and then within just literally, this was just by coincidence, within mere hours of me finally getting to a top level build and getting all the armor I needed, they announced some patch notes and announced that they were nerfing my build that I've been working towards. So then I started working on another build. And then yesterday I found out that they nerfed it again. And in typical looter shooter community fashion, if you go onto the forums and you see people going back, what you'll see is an astounding amount of elitism that's already developed around this player base for a game that's a new IP that just came out a month ago. But you already see people with the get good mentality, which is just so obnoxious in a game that's based around RNG loot drops so heavily. And yes, it is important. The perks and the mods that you get do make your character. If you don't have a proper build in this game, forget about trying to do these expeditions. Even at the lowest level. If you're at level 30 trying to do a level 31 expedition, good luck to you unless you have at least 6 or 7 of the proper mods that you need equipped. So, getting the proper loot to drop, getting the RNG to work in your favor, especially for the higher level, the tier 3 mods, as it were, the most powerful ones, it relies extensively on RNG, and unfortunately, if you're not completing these time challenges with a gold time, your odds of getting the highest tier drops are pretty much non-existent. Now, it can happen occasionally, you can get it, but it's well below a 1% chance of getting any of these things to drop unless you're completing the higher tier expeditions. And unfortunately, what they keep doing with these nerfs is it's devolving into the point where people aren't able to complete content. Even if they have level 50 gear, they're having trouble completing content at much lower tiers now because of these balance changes. Now, obviously what the developers are trying to do is extend the length of the game artificially, but the problem is, again, because of the design of the endgame, you're just on a treadmill that's going nowhere. There's no raid to prepare for. There's no next level of expedition to really prepare for. Once you get to tier 15, that's it. You have unlocked all 14 of the expeditions. Again, they're pretty short, so they just want you to keep grinding the same content again and again and again. And this is, as the developers have said numerous times, not a live service game. They launched this, they said the end game is robust and complete. So they consider this to be a robust and complete end game. There are no announced plans at this point to add any content to the game. So this is what you get. These 14 expeditions that you're just going to run on a loop again and again. And if you go up to the next tier, you're just going to be running the same content. It'll just be slightly harder. Then you unlock the next tier, and it's just the same content. It's a really, really unrewarding endgame, to be honest. And that was what they touted this game to be built around. It was supposed to be focused primarily on the endgame. Now, again, it does have a pretty decent length for a campaign. And if you were someone who just wants to go through the campaign and then try the expeditions out and you don't care about grinding all the stuff out, you can get a halfway decent, maybe slightly above average third-person shooter in the process, depending on which platform you're playing on. However, when I see a developer who can't seem to balance their own game, when they put out patches that breaks armor mitigation, for example, or breaks various other mods aside from the ones that they were trying to fix, and when you constantly are seeing reports in the forums of, no, this mod's broken, this mod's not working, this one's not working, and it just gets to the point where it's pretty obvious that the developers launched a game that was horribly balanced with a end game that I do not understand how a professional development team came up with this end game where they say they want to have build diversity and have all sorts of different crazy OP loadouts, and then all they're doing is swinging the nerf hammer and forcing everyone down the road to maximize their DPS with glass cannon builds, because that's really all that works. If you're not churning out enough DPS, whether it be through weapons or anomaly damage, you're not getting good drops, period. You might be able to complete the expeditions, great, but you're not getting the gold tier drops. And another baffling decision they made, so for example, I mentioned earlier, there's various times to complete these expeditions. Now the times that the developers give vary in length between timers that go down to 6 minutes up to timers that go to 23 minutes. And so what was happening? Well, the players were obviously choosing to do the shorter expeditions because the loot tables for all of these are exactly the same. They only depend on what level tier you're doing them on. The different expeditions, it doesn't matter. The loot tables are going to be the same. So people were doing the quickest ones. Obviously, that's normal player tendency. Again, an oversight by the developer that I do not comprehend. What do they think players are going to do? Do they think they're going to want to sit there and grind out the 23-minute long expedition? Or are they going to want to do the one that's 6 minutes? So the developers' way to fix this, instead of trying to go in and what should have been done before the game ever launched, which was to make sure that there was more parity between the length of time it would take to actually complete each expedition. If you're going to have the same loot table, that only makes sense. But they didn't do that. They went with the nonsensical idea of now they took the shorter expeditions that people were completing faster and they just shortened the time to the point where unless you have a 100% optimized build, you're never going to stand a chance of completing some of these expeditions with a gold time. On the other hand, some of the expeditions you can complete with over 10 minutes to spare easily. It's it just the balance issues with this game are so annoying. And I just can't believe that the game launched in this shape. I can't believe that we're seeing yet another developer of a looter shooter going down the road where they can't seem to get anything buffed to balance things out. They just have to swing the nerf hammer for everything. This is the reason why I stopped playing Destiny. This is the reason why I stopped playing The Division. This is the reason why I stopped playing Elder Scrolls Online. This is the reason why I stopped playing any game that's based around loot and builds where the developers just come in and one day everything's going fine, I'm clearing content easily, and unbeknownst to me, oh, here comes another patch, and now everything in my build is useless. And they expect you, the players, to just constantly grind and grind. This game, Outriders, has only been out for 1 month, and they've already multiple times had huge changes to nerfing the meta. And you can say what you want about running a meta build, but you can't get away from meta builds. Every game is going to have one because there's never going to be an absolutely perfectly balanced game. And the way the developers have this game set up, it's always going to focus on getting through content as quickly possible in the end game. This is the developer's problem. This is their fault. You cannot blame the player base, which is what I see the fanboys doing constantly. You can't blame the player base for going after meta builds when the game is forcing you and funneling you down that path. This is obvious. But the fanboys can't get that through their heads. The developers always have to make the right decisions, right, guys? Yeah, again, this game is highly infected with that sort of mentality from the player base, from what I've seen. And the developers are feeding right into it. They didn't seem to care when their first patch notes came out a couple weeks ago, and their Reddit thread got downvoted to hell because everyone was pretty upset with the changes that they made. And instead, they went down the exact same path with the second batch of changes. They're not buffing anything, they're only nerfing anything, and that is the quickest way to turn players off, is to ruin their builds, nuke their builds overnight. It doesn't matter if someone's going for a build that's OP. That's what the developers actually said they wanted. They said they wanted OP builds and to see how quickly people can clear stuff. Well, apparently they don't. Keep in mind, this is only a PvE game. There is no PvP multiplayer element to this. There's no reward for being the best player in your group. There's no competition here. It's only co-op focused. So swinging the nerf hammer when you're not impacting anyone else's experience is just obnoxious. And the fact that they're doing it apparently every 2 weeks with this game, I'm sorry. I'm out. I'm not investing any more time. I already invested an absurd amount of time, and really the only reason for that is because we have been in a complete drought for game releases over the past few months. So I put a lot of time into the game. That's pretty much all I played throughout the month of April until the very end of the month. But I'm done. I'm not putting any more time into this. I've been down this road with too many developers before. Developers who don't listen. Player bases who ridicule everyone. Who tries to use a weapon that actually works, or a build that actually works, or in this case, the mods that actually work. I don't need the headache anymore. I had my time with the game. It wasn't even that bad, to be honest, throughout the campaign, and I thought that I was really going to enjoy the expeditions, to be honest. But I don't. I don't anymore. And I know people will say, well, you put that much time in a month, it must be good. No, that's not necessarily the case, and that sort of mentality is really short-sighted. Just because I put the hours in didn't mean I was enjoying all that time. And in fact, because of the technical issues with the game, because the sign-in bug was so prevalent, which still persists, which they say they fixed, which still apparently is not fixed on Xbox, and because of the fact that there are constantly, and still to this day, even after the patches, the friends list is still inoperable. Someone can be playing the game on your friends list. You can see them on your PS5 playlist. They won't show up in the game. Never once. I have never once seen one of my friends appear on the in-game friends list. It's broken. I can have 30, 40 friends online. The PSN will tell me. But in the game, it'll be, oh, you have 8 friends online. Nope. It's completely screwed in that regard. There's technical problems, which luckily didn't happen to me, but which was widespread and widely reported on, is the inventory loss bug where players were signing in, getting their players locked out, and losing all their inventory, which the developer has said was their number one priority, yet instead what they're doing is not addressing the problem. It's not happening. They put out a patch a couple weeks ago, and then it's been pretty much silent since then. They said that I've identified the problem, and they're working on it. It's their number one thing. But it's not happening to this point. The game's been out for over a month. And the fact that they still don't have the friends list up and running, we're outside the launch window, people. We're into the second month of the game, okay? We're well past the point where server login should be a problem, and it's peer-to-peer anyway. So it's not like everyone's, signing in and slamming, and they can't handle all the pressure of all these people signing in and playing at once. That we're outside that time frame. So the fact that these issues are persisting isn't good. And the developers will put up a post claiming they fixed stuff on Twitter, and then the stuff isn't actually fixed, and then they'll go silent for a week. People are praising them for their communication and transparency, and granted, it's been a little bit better than what I've seen from the likes of, say, Massive or Bungie. I'll give them that. But it's still been frustrating, and as someone who did put a lot of time into the game over its launch month, I would have liked to keep playing longer and get my other characters up and grind them up, but I'm not going to put any more time into a game that doesn't respect my time. And this is what looter shooters just keep devolving into, in my experience and in many players' experience. The constant nerfing ruins it totally. There's nothing more deflating than spending dozens, if not 100 hours trying to get the loot you need to drop, trying to get the perks you need for your gear, and this goes for any game. And then the developers just come in and swing the nerf hammer. I know I'm dwelling on it, but that's what this game is at this point. That's what your experience will be. So if you're someone who is a Destiny 2 refugee, or you're sick of the Division 2 or anything like that, and you were looking for a bit of a reprieve and you were considering picking this game up, let me just tell you, you're going to be in for the exact same experience from the developers, and the community is going to be just as bad. People will kick you from parties. That's been widely reported. This is one of the issues. There's baffling design decisions all throughout the game. The fact that players can kick you out of your party before you can collect your loot, and then you're just screwed at the end of these expeditions. How is there no failsafe put in place for that? How is a game that is a loot-based game where you can mass delete your loot to break it down or mass sell it to vendors, how does it not have a option to lock your gear for the stuff you don't want to have dismantled? This to me was truly mind-blowing, and just another example of complete lack of foresight from this development team. How do you not have an option to lock the gear? That is mind-boggling. Forget about the technical issues. Forget about the poorly thought out endgame. That is just a simple staple for quality of life. You have to have that. If somebody accidentally deletes a piece of gear that it took them 100 hours to get, once again, instant way to get someone to turn your game off for good. Anyway, something else that needs to be mentioned with the expeditions is it's not just a difference of the time for how long they take, but the difficulty curve for the different expeditions is also quite insane. For example, there's one in particular, Paxian Homestead. That one is so much more difficult, especially to get a gold time, but the boss in that makes it so much more difficult than 80% of the other expeditions. Yet again, the loot table is exactly the same. You have the same exact chance to get the top level gear if you do the hardest one as you do for the easiest one. Now, what the developer should have done, let's do a bit of critique here. What they should have done, eliminate time, which actually this is what they should do now. Forget about what they should have done. What they should do now, eliminate timers entirely. There's no need for them. It should be either you complete it or your team does not complete it. You also have to make changes like allowing single solo players to self-revive at least one time, since you allow team players to do that. This is I don't get that. Why, if you're on a team, can you self-revive one time during each area of an expedition, but if you're by yourself, you just die and the expedition's over and you gotta start over from scratch? Why? Give the solo players one chance to self-revive in each area if you're going to allow that for the players that are in a team. In a team, especially when the other players can go and revive you. Again, I do not understand how stuff like this falls through the cracks. And I've heard people making excuses, the typical excuses you see all the time. Well, they're just a small developer. Oh, they don't have enough funding. Oh, they didn't know any better. No, this is not some young upstart company. Again, I say this time and time again with developers. This company has over 300 employees. This company has over 7 worldwide studios. In fact, they just bought a couple of new studios within the past month due to the success of the sales for Outriders. This game was published by Square Enix. It's one of the biggest publishers in the world. Stop acting like these games are made by little try-hard teams, the little engine that could teams. There's hundreds of people working on this game. 3 times the amount of people that worked on, say, Skyrim, for example. Okay? So enough with this. That it's a lack of manpower or funding or whatnot. It's not the case. Just stop. That's what I keep seeing as well. What are some other issues with the balancing? Well, depending on which weapon you choose, you could be really screwed when it comes to how much reserve ammo you have. If you're running a shotgun build, for example, good luck to you because you're going to be running out of ammo all the time as compared to someone who's running an assault build. Or actually, if you're running a sniper build too, you're going to be running out of the bullets very quickly if you're running a sniper build. Why it's balanced this way? Why they feel like you should be constantly scrounging for ammo with certain weapons when the assault rifle class... Oh, I shouldn't say anything. Because what they'll do is they won't buff the amount of ammo reserved for shotgun. What they'll do is they'll just nerf the amount you get from the assault rifles to bring it all into parity, because that's the type of development cycle that we're seeing now. So maybe I shouldn't even say that anything about the ammo, because that's the sort of stupidity and short-sightedness we're seeing from this developer. Instead of making the game more fun, they make it less fun, and then they still think people are going to stick around. Idiotic, short-sighted design decisions are the hallmark of this game. I cannot stress that enough. It's very frustrating to see the looter-shooter genre, and I've talked about this before in dedicated videos just about this genre before, but it's so frustrating to see that these developers cannot seem to learn from mistakes from other games. They cannot seem to craft a proper endgame to save their life. They cannot seem to launch a game with proper balancing. They cannot seem to put out patch updates that keep their player base happy and actually gives the players what they want. It's another example of developers saying, oh, we know best for you, what's best, how you want to play, how you should be playing the game. You have to play like this. I'm done with it. And I've said this before, this is the first looter game that I've played actually in a year and a half. I think the last one I played was Borderlands 3. So I've been staying away from this type of game specifically because that I haven't been dipping back into Destiny 2 or The Division or Warframe or any games like that I used to play in the past because of these issues. Because I'm so fed up with this. And the developers were talking a big game like, oh no, we're not going to have those sort of issues, but they absolutely do. They absolutely do. And there's just no way around it. There's no defending it either. Something else that we have to talk about is the actual combat itself. Now, the gunplay, the gameplay, the magic attacks are actually pretty satisfying. The mechanics of the game are not bad at all. The actual gameplay mechanics, they're all pretty solid. All of the classes, depending on what build you want to put together, has certain attacks that I enjoyed. The weapons have some pretty interesting mods. Some of them, not a lot of them, but the tier 3 mods can be very interesting and very powerful. As I said before, there's a lot of build synergy that you can put together. There's all sorts of different mods, and everything on paper should stack pretty well when it comes to making builds for the game. But one of the problems is the enemy aspect of the combat. Now, aside from the fact that right now it seems like their latest patch has broken damage mitigation for a lot of players, one of the biggest problems is that the creature type enemies in the game, now mainly you're going to be fighting creatures or human groups, the creature type mobs all boil down to one attack. no matter which enemy you're facing when you're fighting the creatures, they're all going to stun lock you if you get hit. Every single one of them. Now, some of them also add in some really overpowered AoE attacks to slice into the mix, which is also really nice when you're stuck in the middle of an AoE attack and you have 5 or 6 or 7 or a dozen or 20 enemies surrounding you, slapping you around so you can't actually get a shot off sometimes, or can't use your skills if they're on a cooldown to try to get out of the jam. It's really poorly designed. Now, they attempted to address this in another poorly thought out manner this week by changing the spawn times for the mobs, so you would apparently have less enemies coming in at once. But that doesn't address the core problem, is that every single enemy just knocks you back and stun locks you in place. And even if you shorten the spawns, you're still going to be surrounded by several enemies, some of them long range, some of them up in the air, some of them on the ground, some of them, like I said, with massive AoE attacks. The crawlers in particular, some of the broodmother attacks, massive AoE attacks. You have the alphas that can jump on you from across the map. They will dive on you, and you get 5 or 6 of those swarming you. Good luck to you trying to get out of that attack if your cooldowns are down. And that is a major problem with the game. And instead of addressing actual enemy behavior, which is what they should be doing, they're just shortening the spawn times. They're not addressing the core issue. They're just trying to slap a band-aid on it. And that seems to be the MO for these developers. If I sound like I'm complaining a lot about their choices, it's because I am, because their choices that they're making and the designs for this game are honestly, some of the stupidest things I've ever seen in the last 5 years of gaming. Honestly, they're making some of the stupidest mistakes and unforced errors, and all of this really goes to cover up the fact that the game itself, the core game, is actually not bad. I actually was enjoying it. The campaign, I actually enjoyed. It's not the greatest thing I've ever played. The story is kind of campy sometimes. Sometimes it's actually not bad. Sometimes it surprised me. The characters in the game, some of them, not bad at all. Pretty good, in fact. A couple of them. The voice acting, bit hit or miss. I would say if you are going to play the game, go with the male protagonist instead of the female protagonist, because the voice actor they use for the female is horrendous. I can't believe the voice direction in that. It's like there was no one even sitting with them trying to explain how to convey the emotion of the scenes whatsoever. Whereas the male character actually did a pretty good job with the voice acting, and it's a stark difference, I would say. But other than that, I mean, the campaign was not bad. Like I said, it's pretty meaty. You're going to go through various areas, and you'll have a mission to do in each area with a side quest or two, or a hunt for a different creature, or a hunt to go out for a human enemy, and you can go do those and turn those in for more rewards, more loot drops as you go through the game. As you progress, killing enemies, you will gain world tier. Now, if you die, you will lose world tier progress slightly. This can get annoying if you're pushing yourself too hard through the campaign. As if you find yourself going through world tier and you're at world tier 7 and then you bump it up to 8 and a boss is just slamming your head into the wall, go ahead and knock it back. There's no, don't feel bad or peer pressured by the community into thinking that you have to keep it turned to the hardest world tier at all times. If you want to just blast through the boss fight and turn it down a couple just to get through it and then turn it back up to get the rewards again, feel free to do that. There's no reason to push yourself. You can level gear up. One thing I will say, the developers did a great job of letting you level gear up. It is one of the better systems out there. It's not the best. I still think Neo and Neo 2 are untouched in regards to how you level up loot and gear in a looter game. But I will say that this game is probably maybe a close second when it comes to the ability to level all your gear up. And they did improve that slightly this week as well with the patch where they lowered some of the resource costs. I will say it gets to the point once you get up into the mid 40s for leveling your gear where it does start to become obnoxiously imbalanced, because you don't really get enough resources off of the expeditions to smoothly level up your character as compared to when you can do it at lower levels or when you can do it at level 50. Once you get to level 50, the resources are piling in so fast that you will be maxing out your capacity and you won't even be able to keep that much in your inventory because you'll be getting so much resources. That's another, it just keeps going to the balancing issue with this game. It's so obnoxious. And it does cover up the fact that the campaign for a looter game is not bad. It's better than Borderlands 3. It's better than Destiny. It's probably on par, I would say, with like the Division 2 in terms of length and amount of stuff to do. I think the Division 2 had a little bit better city environment. I like that open world feel a little bit more than these condensed maps that you just run into. It feels a little bit more like a corridor shooter in that regard. But it's not bad. The campaign really wasn't bad, and I was pretty impressed. And like I said earlier in the video, I was excited to start the end game. The problem is once you get to the end game, as I discussed for the first half hour of the video, it gets really tedious really fast, and you could say that I overplayed it over the first month, but I was just trying to progress through the game in a natural manner. And honestly, they just don't give you enough meat on that bone to chew with only 2.5 to 3 hours worth of content that they just expect you to repeat for hundreds and hundreds of hours with no end goal in sight, aside from getting your gear together. That's just not enough to keep me interested. And like I said, all the changes from the developers, the fact that they're nerfing everything, I am off the game. I am done with it. I can't really recommend it unless you just are if you love looter shooters and you know that you are just know that after 150 hours, I would assume that anyone playing the game is going to get bored with it. Even if you are someone who say I put 2,000 hours into Destiny, or I put 5,000 hours into the Division, I think even those hardcore players will get sick of this game around the 150 hour mark. Even if you are really into your build making, even if you love the gameplay, there's just not enough there. And again, I see the criticism all the time, well, you played it for 150 hours, so it must be good. No. A lot of those hours were not enjoyable, a lot of them were frustrating, a lot of them were annoying, and a lot of them ended up being worthless because of crashes from the technical side of things. Now, the technical side of things has smoothed out slightly over time. I will say that they are improving that as the game goes on, but overall, I cannot recommend Outriders at this point. Now, maybe if you start hearing reports down the line that things stabilize and the developers stop nerfing everything and making balance changes every 2 weeks, maybe it might be time to check it out. But then you fall into the trap of the people who are still telling you that the game is good are the people that are still playing it, which it tends to be, in general, people that loved the game from the get-go. So you're hearing reports coming back from people that are fanboys of the game. That's the same reason why Fallout 76, for some reason, now has this reputation online of redemption story, because for some reason the people that keep playing the game act like it's the greatest thing since sliced bread now, and that people should come back and the game is great. I imagine the same thing will end up happening here in a year's time. You'd be like, oh, Outriders is fixed now. That's what we hear with Destiny 2 and the Division and everything else when it comes to these games. And then when you actually go back and check the game out, you're like, no, nothing's changed. The developers haven't changed. They're still making the same stupid mistakes, and you end up bouncing again. That's what I see envisioning happening with this game right now. Obviously, I'm not happy with the state of the game. I'm not happy with the developers. And like I said, I'm done. I don't think I've ever been more definitively done with a looter shooter in my life, aside from Destiny, which I will never play just because I cannot stand Bungie anymore. But that is it for my Outriders review. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Please subscribe. If you want to stay in tune with the channel, head forward. And as always, keep it turned to 11.